Chileans have elected their most conservative leader in decades. Jose Antonio Kast's victory is another sign South America is veering to the right. But what's behind the shift? And what are the political implications both across the region and beyond? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Dareen Abughaida. Chile has joined South America's shift to the right, electing Jose Antonio Kast, a hardline conservative, as president. He tapped into voters' fears about a rise in crime and migration and an economic crisis. His victory marks a significant shift since the end of military rule more than 3 decades ago. It also comes as other populist conservatives have taken office in the region. From Bolivia to Argentina and El Salvador, the move to the right is being watched closely, particularly by the U.S. But what does it all mean for the political dynamics in South America? We'll talk to our panel of guests in a moment, but first, this report from Imogen Kimber.
It's a clear victory for Jose Antonio Kast in Chile's presidential election. Opinion polls suggest he won on security concerns.
It wasn't an individual who won here, nor was it a party. Chile won, and hope won. The hope of living without fear won.
Kast says he'll seal the northern border with Venezuela, deport more than 300,000 migrants, treat crime with a firm hand, and kickstart the economy. He's a fan of former dictator Augusto Pinochet and US President Donald Trump. With his far-right policies, Kast beat communist candidate Ginette Jara. But Chile is not the only country in Central and South America to swing towards conservatism. In October, Bolivians ended decades of socialism by voting in Rodrigo Paz Pereira. He's a populist who wants warmer relations with the US and to move away from China. The economy is believed to have been a driving factor in his win.
We expect the next government to improve the country. We and the country are ruined.
Populist right-wing President Nayib Bukele has been in office in El Salvador since 2019. He's cracked down on crime, imprisoning nearly 90,000 people.
We have 22,000 gang members who have no mattresses. They sleep on the floor, who are assigned 2 meals per day. If they try to be clever, we will go from 2 meals to 0, and we will see how long they will last.
In 2023, Daniel Noboa came to power in Ecuador, also on a platform to fight violent crime. And in the same year, Javier Milei won the presidency in Argentina. He won on a populist anti-establishment platform, saying he could fix deeply entrenched economic problems.
The
Argentinian people have decided to leave behind 100 years of decline and persevere on the path of freedom, progress, and growth.
Like many right-wing leaders in Central and South America, he has a close relationship with Trump. High crime rates and economic insecurity appear to have given rise to the right across the Americas, as in other parts of the world. But what this means for safety in the economy depends on which side of the aisle you sit. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera, Inside Story.
Let's now bring in our guest. Joining us from Santiago is Claudio Barrientos, a professor at the School of History at Diego Portales University. In Lima is Jose Ragas, a historian and assistant professor at the Catholic University of Chile. And joining us from London is Christopher Sabatini, a senior fellow for Latin America at Chatham House. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for your time. Claudio, you're in Chile. How do you explain this lurch to the right?
This is a very interesting process, and it's not new. This has been around for a few years now. I think this is a cycle that is closing with this election that started in 2022 after the rejection of the first project to change the constitution, the 1980 constitution that was promulgated by the dictator Augusto Pinochet. And I think from that moment on, from 2022, we have lived in permanent or consistently rise of the conservative ideas and movements in Chile. And that is also joined with a process of disappointment and rejection of the performance of the current government, which have not been able to fulfill most of the major points of its political program when they started the government, and they have to conceal and they have to reduce their expectations during these 4 years. So that's, I think, it's a process that at least has been around for 4 to 5 years since 2022, and after the social upheaval of 2019 also. I think this is a reaction to those moments, and is now being crystallized in the winning of the extreme right candidate this past week.
Okay. Christopher Sabatini, what does Kast's victory tell you about the direction that Chile is headed in?
I think it's a little too early to tell. Clearly, he ran and won on a campaign of getting tough on crime, anti-immigration. So that's going to be seriously one of his main pillars. But quite frankly, Chile has a very strong centrist policy across the board, even with Gabriel Boric, the predecessor of the current president right now. It's never really veered too far to the left or the right since the democratic transition in 1990. It's a very centrist political culture. Kast is indeed, as you say, the most hardline right-wing leader that Chile has elected since the transition to democracy. But I think we'll still see a certain continuity across certain areas. He will lower taxes. He will get more tough on crime. He's pledged to organize barriers to prevent, including ditches and fences to prevent immigrants from crossing the border illegally into Chile. But I think in terms of economic policy, for example, we'll still see Chile's very strong bend towards free trade. Chile has over 20 free trade agreements with different countries. I think we'll still see a very much of a pro-free market policy. Even Boric, while he increased taxes on the rich, did not completely overturn the free market model that had been established since the government of Augusto Pinochet. And I think in other areas we'll see perhaps other more conservative social issues. Jose Antonio Kast is a very observant Catholic. He is against abortion. We'll see if he will try to roll back women's reproductive rights in that case. And there'll be some other sort of socially conservative issues which he'll probably try to promote. But quite frankly, his inaugural speech, or his victory speech rather, was quite inspiring in terms of talking about the need for civility, hard work, respect for institutions, very much, despite his being a provocateur in the past, very much in the center. So we'll see how he governs. But I think right now we're looking at someone who's a little bit more tempered, just simply managed to really crack that whole popular opinion issue when it comes to crime and insecurity that he's taken advantage of.
Okay, Jose, is this all part of some sort of regional realignment? Or is it perhaps a protest vote against the left, against the former government, and perhaps a cycle of simply voter backlash?
Yeah, thank you. No, that's a very interesting question. And actually, I think it's both, because at the national level, it's a vote against the current government by Gabriel Boric, which many voters consider that he didn't fulfill his promises in terms of security and also in improve the quality levels of economy. But also, as you say, it's a realignment. We see this in a broader trend, for example, from the late 90s, when there was the beginning of a new coalition of governments that won the elections by the left wing and social democracy, and that was known as the pink tide. And now we can see that there is a clear shift to the not only the right wing, but also far right wing governments that depends not only from South America or even Central America, as Christopher was saying, but also because they are pushed by President Donald Trump. No, so they are trying to create this sort of a coalition. For example, Jose Antonio Kast, one of his first statements as president-elect, he has said that he's going to meet with President Javier Milei to learn, I quote, how to fight inflation, which it doesn't happen in Chile. So this is more like an ideological front that is not only Chile, Argentina, but also we can see that this is happening in Bolivia. It's happening also
right,
in Peru.
But Jose, how do you explain it happening? How do you explain it happening across so many countries?
Yeah, I think that there is a dissatisfaction, and also there has been this sort of a re-emergence of the radical right, that they were more they coalesced around the specific topics, for example, like immigration, security, and economics. So, and this was they succeeded in doing this, and this also exposed the lack of like a similar discourse in more progressive groups and parties, that they couldn't win elections over the past few years.
Christopher, just on the point that Jose made a moment ago about Donald Trump. Look, some say this is in fact Donald Trump's playbook. Tough borders, law and order, migration. These are all issues that Trump himself had campaigned on, and now we're seeing it in Latin America. Are these leaders truly following in Trump's footsteps out of conviction, do you think? Or are they just using that playbook because that perhaps works electorally?
I think it's a little of both, but we have to understand, much like Donald Trump in 2016, when he sort of intuited that the population in the U.S. had turned very anti-immigrant, he tapped into that anger and was able to launch that for his presidency then, and then, of course, in 2024. In this case, what we're looking at is real. If you look at public opinion across Latin America, citizens' number one concern in most countries, including in Peru, in Chile, in Colombia, in El Salvador, has been crime. And so what these politicians have managed to do is understand sort of the direction of travel of a lot of popular opinion, and they're playing to that. It's also important to recognize that in some of these cases, as Jose was saying, the leftist governments haven't really delivered on a lot of promises. In fact, the left really hasn't been able to come up with much of a policy that's convincing at addressing crime. And so as people's fear of insecurity and violence increases, they risk turning away from the left and pursuing a much more hardline, iron-fisted policy, which is people like Jose Antonio Kast, Nayib Bukele of El Salvador are promising. Argentina is a little different there because, of course, it was the inflation that really drove Javier Milei into Casa Rosada, the presidential palace, in his election. And he was also right. There's no inflation in Chile, so it was an odd thing to say for Kast to say he's going to learn from Milei on his anti-inflation tactics. But, I think we're going to see a wave of more right-wing politicians coming to power, some of them very much from outside the main political spectrum, if you will. We'll see that quite likely in Peru, I would guess, in the upcoming elections next year. We may see that in Colombia. But again, it's reflecting the lack of faith in leftist governments to be able to deliver security amid rising fears of crime, as well as a right wing that sort of is quite unabashed, unashamed even, of promoting more hardline response.
Claudio, what were the key drivers, the key issues that people in Chile were voting on? I mean, were they issues like crime, migration, as well as economic anxiety? And do you think the voters are choosing to go to the right out of conviction, or is it out of fear?
I think a little both. I think it's out of conviction in terms that there's a crisis within the left in our region also. There's a distance and lack of encounter between the leftist movements and leftist parties with the social basis and the masses in our countries. And at the same time, it's also in Chile a little bit of fear. Chile is one of the most fearful societies about crime and social insecurity. However, the real statistics about rates, crimes in Chile are really low compared to other countries in Latin America. However, the sensation and the impression of fear, the feeling of being fearful, is way higher in the polls these days. So I think the fear against uncontrolled migration and organized crime and everyday crime on the streets is real. However, the statistics shows that the crime rates are not that real. But fear and the managed fear in the discourses of the right wing, extreme right wing parties have been central to the discourse and to the messages that people have been receiving from the candidates, from different candidates.
So Claudia, from what you see, from what you see, I mean, speaking of fear in particular, does that fear then make voters more tolerant of hardline right-wing policies?
Yeah, several polls have shown that people are willing to give up some social rights or even human rights for protection, for security against crime and against and because of this fear sensation that people are experimenting in Chile. So I think you're right in that point.
Okay, Jose, Trump, as you know himself, as well as other officials in his administration, have openly embraced, if I can use that word, right-wing leaders in Latin America. Do you think that the U.S. Influence has helped tilt the region in that direction?
At some point, yes, but not exactly by Trump, because many candidates, they feel that they want to belong to this kind of broader coalition of right-wing and radical leaders. So many of them, they pleaded that they have the support of Donald Trump. For example, in the case of Jose Antonio Kast, he made many references to Trump. He also tried to mimic his style, putting this kind of trying to protect himself from kind of to being attacked or being during the electoral campaigns, and also having this playbook, as you said, with the immigrants and blaming them of many of the problems that the country has. So. But on the side of Donald Trump, they are doing that, and they are trying to balance this in favor of them to Washington, and especially to oppose, for example.
Well, do you think, Jose? Do you think that shift would have happened regardless of Washington and Donald Trump?
Maybe, but at a slower pace, because I think that the second term of Donald Trump has accelerated this coalition, and he's willing to give support. For example, we have seen that in the case of Argentina with Javier Milei, not only in terms of public support, but also with money in order to prior to the campaign. So I think that Washington is very important in this regard, and they are trying to corner, for example, to Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil in this matter.
Christopher, what does this all mean for Latin America's relations? I mean, we've spoken a little bit about the U.S., but what about other countries like China, for example, and as well as multilateral institutions?
Well, first of all, just going back to the points that Jose made, Trump is probably indirectly influencing this switch, and he's openly courting partisan allies, if you will, within the region, which is really quite unprecedented in modern history. He even, as Jose mentioned, offered a $20 billion line of credit to Argentina to shore up its central bank if President Javier Milei's party won the midterm election. So it was even, if you will, sort of a form of bribery for the vote. So he's really manipulating voters' intentions, or at least attempting to. We'll see how that works. Now, on the rest of the region, the truth is China is Chile's #1 trade partner. It's also Argentina's. It's also Brazil's. And as Jair Bolsonaro, the former president of Brazil, discovered, he railed against China in the campaign. But when he was elected, he realized he couldn't quite disengage with China. So I think what we'll see more and more is an acceptance by the Trump administration to at least recognize that these countries depend on trade with China. But in terms of like infrastructure investments or things like we saw in the Panama Canal, where Trump erroneously claimed that 2 Chinese port facilities on either end of the Panama Canal were spy stations, they're going to be very careful about running that risk of making themselves a target of Trump's sort of, if you will, sort of Monroe Doctrine, which they referred to in the National Security Strategy document as a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. So they'll be very careful, try to play it on both sides, but they will definitely not openly court infrastructure investment and try to, if you will, sort of trumpet their ties to China or any of the other sort of governments that are seen as being, if you will, somewhat rogue from Trump's perspective, including, of course, Iran. So they'll be careful, but they do have to recognize the balance of power has shifted within global economics. So they have to recognize China and India and other countries' demands for their raw materials.
Christopher, just one more for you before I head to Claudio once again in Chile. But just a moment ago, you were saying that you expect to see more countries go towards the right in Latin America. Just elaborate on why you say that and what you're basing that on.
First of all, it is crime. In the case of Peru, where Jose is, the mayor of Lima is very tough on crime. And in fact, the last president was impeached because of a criminal incident that really sort of upset the country. So they're going to be looking for, in that case, really what they would say in Spanish, a mano dura, an iron fist. In Colombia, we see the case of where crime has increased, insecurity has increased under leftist President Gustavo Petro. There again, Trump is really trying to play in Colombian politics. He's been picking fights with Gustavo Petro. Gustavo Petro is intemperate and does say some things that are deeply offensive, but he's clearly been weighing in, threatening to suspend security assistance, threatening tariffs, imposing sanctions. And part of this is an attempt to influence the elections in Colombia next year. And there were a couple candidates on the right, Vicky Davila and Abelardo, who are kind of cut from the same cloth as Donald Trump. And I can't help but feel that he would rather see them get elected than many of the other 30 or so candidates right now that are running for president in Colombia in 2026.
Okay, Claudio, if this indeed is some sort of quote unquote failure of the left, then do you think the left can reinvent itself at this point, or has the ground just shifted beneath it?
This is an opportunity for the left to reinvent itself, and I think several critical discourses and several critical readings of the situation have been published these days in the media, and some leaders from the government, government party and the government coalition are trying to raise their voice with critical points and with self-criticism in terms of how they had managed and performed during these 4 years, and what did they forget, what did they left behind in terms of their principles and programs. I think this is a very interesting opportunity for the left to redirect and reorient their actions and discourses and ideas in the next years. We are going to see from March on what kind of opposition the left and the center-left parties are going to implement. That's going to be the most interesting scenario for the left in terms of how they're going to face this new government and how they're going to be vigilant of the rights, social rights that have been achieved in the last years, and how they're going to defend most of those new scenarios of rights and those new, how they're going to perform in this new political scenario in terms of how they are going to regain their electors, and also how they're going to increase and reinforce their position in the masses and in the working classes again, trying to gain again the hegemony against the right wing. But I think it's a very interesting point.
So Claudio, just let me get final thoughts from all three of you on sort of looking ahead and what happens next. Claudio, I'll start with you. Do you think this is the start of a conservative era in Latin America, or is it just a volatile moment and that pendulum could really swing back?
I don't know. I think in Latin America right now we see a very strong region that is turning to conservative ideas. I think in the case of Chile, people and most politicians within the left have the hope that next government is going to be a center-left government again. So, and we have this tradition of replacement, the ideological replacement every time since 2010. However, I think we are facing a very strong moment for conservative ideas within our societies because of fear. But at the same time, it's a very interesting moment because most of the political coalitions or political parties from the beginning of the transition to democracy are shifting and changing. The coalitions, the old coalitions, are not the same now, and they are likely to change in the next few years.
Okay, Jose, what do you think looking ahead? Is this a conservative era that Latin America is facing, or could there be some sort of swing back?
Yeah, no, I think that this is going to be a rotation. I mean, if we see, for example, in the case of Chile, the history of the past 20 years, we can see that there has been a rotation between progressive governments and also liberal economic governments. But also, I think that something important for the left wing is they have to reinvent themselves, because this is no longer the Cold War or other kind of the scenario that they fought in the past. I mean, I also want to mention that, for example, Janet Jara, who was the candidate in Chile who lost, she won 5 million votes in a country that has a very, very strong anti-communism. So I think that this is something, and this is a point of departure where the left wing can start to build. And also in other countries, for example, they have to start to think about about that this is not the groups that they supported them. They are not the same that will do in the future. This is a population that is going to get in order in the future. This is a population that is no longer dictated by the economic forces over the past 50 years, for example, in terms of the working class, in terms of the universities. So I think that this is an opportunity for them, not only to think about for the next 20 or 30 years, but also to how to build a coalition and how to build now again a popular base in that, and also to provide a balance with in a certain future in Latin America and the rest of the world.
Okay, Christopher, last word to you. Looking ahead, what do you think will happen in the region?
I suspect there'll be volatility, electoral volatility. There has been for a long time. We talk about the swing to the left, the pink tide, the blue tide, now the conservative tide. The truth is that traditional political parties in Latin America have collapsed. As Jose and Claudio both mentioned, the coalition, the concertación that governed Chile basically for the first couple presidencies after the democratic transition has disappeared. In the case of Colombia, for example, the liberal and conservative parties are no longer relevant. Javier Milei, in the case of Argentina, came out of nowhere. He was only a one-term congressperson, didn't belong to the Peronist party, really didn't belong to any of the other main conservative party. What's happening here, and well, also in the case of Peru, you have literally dozens of parties. They even have a term for it in Peru. They refer to them as Toyota parties because all of their members can fit into Toyota. What we're seeing is the fragmentation, the atomization of political parties, and a real anti-incumbency streak right now when presidents can't deliver what they promise. So I don't think this is a wholesale secular shift to the right so much as it is just expressing really the disarray that party politics are in right now and the levels of citizen discontent with how much politicians have delivered. So for better or worse, I think we're in for a bumpy ride in many of these countries in terms of coherent policymaking and consistent. I think Chile may be a little bit of an example because of its political history. But in the other countries, we'll see the swings back and forth between different political coalitions.
Christopher, we have about 20 seconds left. Is this an opportunity then the left is going to seize?
I think, again, as everyone's been saying, it does have to reinvent itself. And that means really demonstrating they can be tough on crime, but also respect human rights, which is really, that's what, for many people, they doubt that. Let's take the case, for example, in Brazil, where a raid in Rio de Janeiro, ordered by a conservative governor of Rio de Janeiro, resulted in over 100 people. And Lula criticized that, and he was condemned by many citizens for being too soft on crime.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll have to leave it there. Claudio Barrientos, Jose Ragas, and Christopher Sabatini, thanks for joining us. Thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Join the conversation on X. Our handle is AJ Inside Story. From myself and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching, and bye-bye for now.